The first thing I want to do is acknowledge that in eastern Pennsylvania, the land that we live on um, is the ancestral home of the Lenni Lenape people. Actually, the Lenape-Hoking extended from western Long Island, southern New York, all of New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, and northern Delaware. And so we acknowledge that we are occupying their land. They've lived here for thousands of years and continue to live here. And so we honor them today and take a moment to remember that this is their home. And now I'd like to offer an opening prayer. This is a traditional Irish prayer that Gary just found for me. May the blessing of light be on you, light without and light within. May the blessed sunlight shine upon you and warm your heart till it glows like a great fire, so that the stranger may come and warm himself at it, as well as the friend. And may the light shine out of your eyes like a candle set in the windows of a house, bidding the wanderer to come in out of the storm. And may the blessing of the rain be on you, the soft, sweet rain. May it fall upon you so that all the little flowers may spring up and shed their sweetness on the air. And may the blessing of the great rains be on you, that they may beat upon your life and wash it fair and clean, and leave there many a shining pool where the blue of heaven shines, and sometimes a star. And may the blessing of the earth be on you, the great round earth. May you ever have a kindly greeting for people you pass as you are going along the roads. And for now, may the Lord bless you and bless you kindly. Amen. And now Gary is going to present a song for us.
The song comes from a resource, it's backwards in probably, but it's Singing the Sacred, which comes from the United Methodist Board of Global Ministries. And the title of the song is simply Mother Earth. It's written by Sharon Birch, originally in Diné, which is what we would think of as Navajo, but the name of the people is the people, simply Diné. And that was her first language. And so the song was originally written in Sharon Birch's first language. It's been translated into English for this resource. And I just have a recording that I made, and you'll be able to see the text and hopefully hear the song. And this will be part of our worship time. So, somebody tell me if you can't hear. One of the other moderators can chime in if you can't hear this. I'm going to start it now.
Hey, hey, yeah, all things in you bring me joy. Yes, all things in you bring me joy. Nea. Hey, hey, yeah, all things in you bring me joy. Yes, all things in you bring me joy. Nea. Mother Earth is my home, I am part of Mother Earth. Mother Earth's feet are mine, Mother Earth's arms are mine, Mother Earth's strength is mine, Mother Earth's thoughts are mine, her thoughts are mine. Hey, hey, yeah, all things in you bring me joy. Yes, all things in you bring me joy. Nea. Mother Earth is my home, Mother Earth my only home. Mother Earth's grief is mine, Mother Earth's joy is mine. Mother Earth's hopes are mine, Mother Earth's fate is mine. Mother Earth's dream is mine, her dream is mine. Mother Earth's dream is mine, her dream is mine. Hey, hey, Neya, all things in you bring me joy. Yes, all things in you bring me joy. Neya. Neya, neyo, neya, neyo, neya, neyo, neya.
Thank you, Gary. And now I'm going to introduce our partner for this particular program is the Coalition of Natives and Allies. But before I do that, oh no, that's right. Okay, sorry. Coalition of Native and Allies, their mission is to get rid of all racist mascots in the state of Pennsylvania. And it's composed of 4 women, 2 Native women, and 2 allies. And so the first of these I'm going to introduce you to is Donna Fan Boyle.
Hi, my name is Donna Fan Boyle. I am Choctaw and Cherokee. I'm the mother of 2 sons who both went through the Neshaminy School District in Langhorne, which is in Bucks County. I raise honeybees and chickens, and I've become a Native rights advocate through my work with trying to fight these mascots, which are racist and bring about bad behavior. But through that work, I've also come to be an advocate for other Native rights issues because they are all intertwined. And I'd like to introduce you to Ramona Woods.
Tega, sewa kwega. Ramona, Yurusha Woods Yojats. Kunkwehonwe, Ganawage, Dewa Gatujum. Nyawakoa. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ramona Yurusha Woods. I am a Mohawk from Ganawage. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. I'm a co-founding member of the Coalition of Natives and Allies and a member in good standing of the American Indian Movement of Central Texas and the American Indian Movement Woodlands Territories support group. I am also the founder of Little Blue Sky Foundation, which serves to promote the educational, physical, and spiritual well-being of Native American Indians. And I would like to introduce you to one of our allies in CNA, Arla Patch.
Hello, everyone. The other Euro-American ally in this group is not able to be with us tonight, and I'd like to just tell you something about her. Her name is Lynn Asarchi. She was the founder, is the founder and executive director of the Kidsbridge Tolerance Center. It's an immersion small group discussion learning lab for youth and teachers in New Jersey. And Lynn has spent the last 18 years creating programs and interactive experiences dealing with anti-bullying, anti-bias, empathy, respect, diversity appreciation, and accurate Native American history. A genuine change agent, Lynn implemented evidence-based curriculum and evaluation that resulted in significant attitude improvements in empathy, stereotype awareness, empowerment, and moral reasoning. During the pandemic, this unique center currently features facilitator-led remote social emotional programming for youth pre-K to 8th grade. And about me, my name Arla Patch. I'm an artist. I've written 2 books on art and healing, and I'm also a certified Pennsylvania teacher. I was raised in Bucks County, but I lived in Maine for 30 years. And that's where I became the community engagement coordinator for an organization called Wabanaki Reach, which really brought about the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the first one of its kind in the United States. And I was really happy to see that Gisa Tanamuk, who is one of our Indigenous commissioners, is on the call. Hi, Gisa Tanamuk. I think the next thing for us to do is really to share our program now that you've heard about the 4 of us who are the co-founding members of this organization, which you'll definitely hear more about. So I am going to screen share. and put it in presentation mode. And Donna will be our first speaker.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that I forgot to mention something very important, that I am a member of the American Indian Movement of Central Texas, also the American Indian Movement Woodlands Territory, and Indigenous 215, three very important Native rights groups. Okay, so the Coalition of Natives and Allies would like to thank the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the Methodist Church and their Committee on Native American Ministries for this important opportunity. We also would like to thank Kidsbridge Tolerance Center in New Jersey for partnering with the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, encouraging research and accurate history to be presented to teachers, students, and the public. In order to understand the issue of using Native American mascots for sports teams, it is essential to understand the historical context for taking these images. Most of us were never taught the true history, especially if you are not Native. Generations of school students have been armed with harmful information and false narratives, which have laid the foundation for stereotyping and injustices. It's time for the truth to be taught so we can put an end to the widespread collective ignorance. We have a sheet of these historical facts in the program that can be downloaded in the chat sidebar. So please don't feel the need to take notes. This presentation is packed with information and we understand that it can feel overwhelming. Also in the chat bar will be 6 steps schools can take to actually honor Native Americans without using Native names and images as mascots.
We acknowledge that the land we occupy in Pennsylvania is the tribal territories of the Lenape, Susquehannock, Haudenosaunee, Osage, and Erie. All had been forced out by the 1700s. Because of this forced removal, today there are no state or federally recognized tribes within Pennsylvania. However, there are 3 state recognized tribes in New Jersey: the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape, Powhatan Lenape, and the Ramapo-Munsee Lenape Nation. There are also 3 federally recognized Lenape tribes that were forcibly relocated to Oklahoma and Wisconsin, and 2 Lenape nations in Ontario, Canada. They mostly use the term Delaware.
It's not advancing. There we go. This is actually from the Declaration of Independence. Right from the very start of our country, Native people were considered savages and not the same as the European settlers. You can see the quote right here: merciless Indian savages is how natives were referred to. And also included in this document is the phrase, all men were created equal, which we understand means white landowning men. "40 years before Columbus even sailed, Pope Nicholas V put out proclamations. They were known as the Doctrines of Discovery, or the Doctrines of Christian Discovery. And what they basically said is, this is a quote right off of one of them: if you can capture, vanquish, subdue the Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, referring to those people that you might run into if you landed on foreign territory and they were not Christian. You can put them into perpetual slavery. You can take all their possessions and property." From the Bull Romantis Pontifex. And you might think that this was only valid back in the 15th century, but this has been part of our court system all the way through. And most recently, the 2005 Supreme Court ruling against the Oneida.
Dialed. Please check a number and dial again.
Oops, is that me or somebody else hearing that? Okay, well, anyway, so the case was Sherrill versus the Oneida Nation, and the Supreme Court of the United States ruled against the Oneida, and they cited a footnote for the Doctrine of Discovery, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg happened to be the one who delivered the opinion of the court that overturned a lower court decision. Speaking of Christopher Columbus, who, by the way, never did land on North America, something else we were not taught is the genocidal and barbaric way he dealt with indigenous people in the islands where he landed. Some of his acts, just to name a few, was burning Native people alive, raping children, cutting off limbs, and using torture. These atrocities were documented in the diaries of the Spanish priest Bartholomew de las Casas, who witnessed these acts. From the very beginning, our country has had deliberate policies for the destruction of indigenous populations. Another very painful example is the Spencer Phipps Proclamation, which was just one of many proclamations that put bounties on the heads of Native people. The payoff was 50 pounds for an adult male, which was a year's salary at the time. Why is it not changing? This is the actual Spencer Phipps Proclamation itself. And as you can see from the text, for every male Penobscot above the age of 12 shall be taken 50 pounds. There's an amount for females and there's an amount for children under the age of 12. In this area, it was this act of the Maryland General Assembly in 1763 that determined that the scalp of, quote, hostile Indians was worth 50 pounds. And that means that any Native family could have been hunted for their scalps based only on the sworn testimony of the settler that they said that they were hostile. Bounties were highly profitable and provoked widespread murder of indigenous people all over this continent. In fact, in the 1850s, the US government reimbursed the state of California $924,000 in that day and age for bounty fees. That reduced the California Native population by 2/3 in one decade. And when citizens would bring scalps to the collection stations, the clerk would ask, "How many Redskins do you have for me?" In order to prove a scalp was male or female, they were required to additionally present genitalia with a scalp. Male scalps were worth more. Do all sports fans know this barbaric fact for the meaning of the word Redskins?
Native peoples are the most heavily legislated against in the history of our country. Every single treaty made with Native Americans has been broken. These acts of legislation are discriminatory, making it very hard for Natives to live their lives. We will be mentioning only a few congressional acts of particular impact targeting Native inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Civilization Fund Act of 1819 laid the financial groundwork for funding the residential schools that we'll talk about later. In the 1830 Indian Removal Act, widely known as the Trail of Tears, 46,000 Native peoples were forced off their land on foot in the winter without adequate supplies. Over half of the Native population did not survive the long journey on foot. 25 million acres of their land was taken for the ever-growing westward expansion. There were multiple Trails of Tears, which included, but was not exclusive to, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Seminole, Choctaw, and the Creek Nations. This act impacted nearly all tribes east of the Mississippi. Smallpox-infected blankets were widely distributed as an extermination tactic. Some people disputed the use of smallpox as deliberate biological warfare used against Natives. This letter from Colonel Bouquet to General Amherst details the distribution of such blankets and clothing to, quote, inoculate the Indians. Lord Jeffrey Amherst approved and said, quote, try every other method that can serve to extirpate this execrable race. The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the federal government to survey an additional 93 million acres of tribal land and take it out of Native control. Theodore Roosevelt himself said it was, quote, the mighty pulverizing engine to break up the tribal mass. Native people were assaulted from every angle, and the one thing that would be a lifeline, our spiritual practices, were outlawed. In 1882, the Secretary of the Interior ordered an end to the, quote, heathenish dances and ceremonies as they were, quote, a hindrance to civilization. Although this country was founded on religious freedom, it is evident that the persecuted became the persecutors. Not until 1978, after 96 years, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act finally lifted this order because of the efforts of the American Indian movement.
Another damaging and disempowering policy, one of the truths that brought great shock and grief to me, was voting. Another area of astounding historical fact. We know that Black males were given the right to vote in 1870, although we must recognize the Jim Crow laws, which made voting inaccessible for Black and brown people until the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And when were white women given the right to vote? 1920. And I say white women because it was largely white women who got that right. Native people were not given citizenship until 1924 to try to take away tribal sovereignty, but not given the right to vote in federal elections until 1954. Today, voting is still challenging for many people of color due to gerrymandering and a range of exclusionary practices targeting reservations. And yet, Native people served in every single military conflict from the beginning of this country in disproportionate numbers to the rest of the population. And regardless of the fact that they were not citizens, they could not vote. They died in every military conflict serving this country. The Choctaw and Cherokee Code Talkers helped win World War I, and World War II, representatives of 16 individual tribes of Code Talkers helped us win that war. Then in 1948, the UN came up with a definition of genocide. It was act or acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, or racial religious group. So in this close-up, you can see the articles listed. I'm just going to talk about the first article, the killing of members of a group. These would include, and I'm just, as I said, only going to mention just a few, and that's where that link in the sidebar of 38 pages of massacres. But I just want to mention, especially this one in Pennsylvania, the Gnadenhutten massacre, which in 1782, 96 Christian Lenape were bludgeoned to death, and it was mostly women and children. The Clear Lake massacre of 1850, 200 were killed. Sand Creek massacre, 1863, 230 killed. Wounded Knee massacre, 1890, 300 killed. Bear River massacre, 400 killed in 1863. It was also, as you could see, causing serious bodily harm, deliberate inflicted on the group. All of these things are very clearly evident. On Article 2, Section E, that refers to the forcible transfer of children from one group to another. This was the basis for the main Truth and Reconciliation Commission about the residential schools. And my fellow Euro-Americans, the thing I have to say to you right now is that we must admit and recognize that our government has engaged in all of these. And great harm has resulted from remaining ignorant and silent about these painful facts of our shared history with Native peoples. You can just let that sink in and take a breath. We must recognize that our government has engaged in all these definitions of genocide.
In 1956, the government passed the Indian Relocation Act. This act moved 30,000 Indians into cities. It was another attempt to, quote, solve what the government saw as their, quote, Indian problem. Natives were manipulated with unkept promises of vocational training, education, and housing. Indians had difficulty assimilating into white mainstream society, resulting in an increase in poverty, alcoholism, and the loss of culture and traditions. The lasting and damaging effects of this is that Native Americans have the highest unemployment rates and the highest poverty rates in the United States. Today, 71% of all Native Americans now live in urban areas. In July of 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the American Indian Movement, an advocacy group, was founded to address the problem of police brutality and generations of inequality. In 1978, AIM organized a 3,000-mile march from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. to present the 20-point proposal of the Trail of Broken Treaties to President Nixon. Nixon would not meet with them. Although, as a result, Congress passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and the Indian Children Welfare Act, ICWA. In order to fully grasp the significance of this next piece of our history, I ask you to imagine the government coming into your home and taking away your children and grandchildren under the threat of imprisonment and/or the elimination of subsidies. A genocidal act of assimilation experienced by Native Americans in history. This practice of taking Native children away from their families had continued for Native children with ICWA as the only law to protect them. To trace the historical thread for why we need a Truth and Reconciliation to address this in every state with tribal nations, we need to go back to the 1800s. Brigadier General Richard Henry Pratt led the shift in official policy from violence and conquest to the policy of genocidal assimilation of Native children into the white culture. A model of forced assimilation created by Pratt was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Their motto was, "Kill the Indian in him and save the man." Policies of assimilation are policies of cultural genocide and a deliberate systematic destruction of a culture. Carlisle was the model for over 450 Indian residential schools all over the US and Canada. Hundreds of thousands of students passed through their doors. Children were taken as young as 4 and were required to stay until the age of 16 to 18 to ensure that they gave up their, quote, savage beliefs. Many never went home in the summer, but were sent out as free labor to work on farms. Many died at the schools or were not returned to the correct tribe. And those that did no longer spoke the language and remembered little of their tribe's culture and had lost their connection to their parents and their families. Overall, 150,000 children in Canada and hundreds of thousands of Native children in the United States were removed from their homes. Arriving at Indian residential schools, they took away their clothing and sacred traditional possessions. They cut off their hair, doused them with DDT powder, a carcinogenic pesticide, and they were forbidden to speak their language or they would have their mouths washed out with lye, and they were forbidden to communicate with their siblings. Children were also abused physically, spiritually, emotionally, and sexually. Over 1,000 children died while at the Indian residential school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania alone. Residential schools reached their peak in the 1970s in the United States, and the last residential school was closed in Canada in 1996. With the loss of homelands, way of life, their means of survival, their autonomy, and the massacres of Indian people, the assault to every aspect of our existence has created a wound to the mind, body, and spirit. This intergenerational wound, passed from one generation to the other, experienced a devastating blow when they took our children. Historical intergenerational trauma is compounded when it is pretended that this history never happened. It not only devastated the children taken, but the families and the communities left behind. The children placed in the Indian residential schools experienced the loss of their parents, family, and community. They were isolated from the support systems they knew and trusted. This was a policy of, quote, erase and replace. This is cultural genocide.
As mentioned, Congress did pass the Indian Child Welfare Act, known as ICWA, in 1978. And this act did codify higher standards of protection for Indian children. And in the Native community, a child has 3 parents, the mother, the father, and the rest of the tribe. It is in the best interest of Native children to be placed in Native homes, and in the best interest of the tribe for its own survival, for children to stay in the community. In the 1950s, 35% of Native children were still being taken from the tribes nationwide. And between 1958 to 67, the taking of Native children expanded into adoption like the Indian Adoption Program in the US, which took 395 Indian children from across the country uprooting them from their safe and loving homes to be part of a quote experiment led by the Child Welfare League of America. In Canada, it was known as the quote 60s scoop. Thousands of Indigenous children were taken from their families, adopted by white families in Canada and the US, losing their names, language, and connection to their heritage. In Maine in 1984, the rate of taking Native children was 19 times higher than in other states, and children were being taken without notification to the tribe as required by that ICWA law. The Truth Commissions in both Canada and Maine have been a good start in acknowledging the atrocities and an attempt to begin the healing. It was these rates of taking Native children that led, and the lack of compliance to ICWA, that led to that first Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Maine. These are the tribal chiefs and the governor of Maine at the time at a signing ceremony. It's important to note that ICWA only applies to citizens of federally recognized tribes. In New Jersey, the state tribes can only hope for a courtesy from the courts.
In New Jersey, because it is not a federally recognized tribe, Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Chief Mark Gould often has to deal with disrespect from judges who show little concern or courtesy because they are not bound by ICWA for Native children. In New Jersey, Native people experience racism and denial of their existence on many levels, including the public schools. This is Chief Perry of the Ramapo-Muncie Lenape in northern New Jersey. Oftentimes, a Native person is dismissed if they don't fit the archaic stereotypical vision of an Indian based on the inaccurate history that is taught in schools and learned from television and movies. The tribal leader for the Powhatan Lenape Nation is Reverend Roy Running Stream Bundy. At one point, almost 90% of the population of Morrisville, New Jersey were Powhatan Lenape people.
The legacy of genocide has left Native communities with the highest rate of socioeconomic distress in the country. These statistics on chronic diseases, unemployment, suicide, homicide, police shootings, missing and murdered women, substance abuse, etc., do not reflect who we are, but what has happened to us since the first contact and how the government has continued to fail us. Native Americans have on average a life expectancy that is 5 years less than all other races in the United States population, and it can range to as much as 24.6 years less in some areas of the country. Land, water, hunting, and fishing rights continue to be a struggle for Native people in this country today. This Penobscot Reservation is made up of several islands in the Penobscot River, and their reservation has always included the river, their source of food with fishing. Regardless, the state of Maine has been trying to take away the river as part of the reservation. Currently in Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq fishermen who have been exercising their treaty rights to catch lobster outside of the province's commercial season have faced violent and racist attacks. Their traps and property have been vandalized, they have been physically assaulted, and their lobster pound burned to the ground. The RCMP and Prime Minister Trudeau have sat back and done nothing to assert the treaty rights of the Mi'kmaq to fish for a moderate living that were given in the 1700s and upheld in their Supreme Court as recently as 1990s. In addition to the statistics mentioned, these are only a few other current issues faced by Indigenous peoples. Uranium mine poisoning, voter suppression, underfunded health system, inadequate education system, poor housing, oil pipelines, illness from atomic bomb testing, non-potable water and lack of indoor plumbing or electricity, loss of tribal lands, and broken treaties.
From the doctrine of discovery origins to the quote, manifest destiny, which is what I was taught in school, we saw nature and her resources as a commodity. And when I use the term we in this context, I'm referring to Euro-Americans. We took what we wanted and we did anything it took to get the original people out of the way. And notice the angelic nature of this taking depicted in this classic painting. On the dark left side, it depicts the savage West. And then the brightly lit right side depicts the settlers in the East, chasing away the natives and the dangerous wildlife as they moved in behind the guidance of this Christian angel. And the truth is, we, white people, took their land, culture, and languages. We took their resources. We killed their people who were in our way. And then we took their children. And the latest version of that mentality is that we take their identity and the individual tribal cultures and replace them with stereotyped caricatures and racial slurs. And then we tell them it is to honor them. We take away their identity with mascots and have the arrogance to tell them what it means. When you reduce people to a mascot, you take away their equality. They are not the same as other people and do not require the same respect. This profoundly affects policy, which impacts Native communities. With many mascots being animals, you put them on the same level as an animal, not as a human. Redskins, Braves, Warriors, Raiders, all are disrespectful and harmful to youth. These appellations are offensive to both Native Americans and to those in youth education, intent on reversing the harm that stereotypes cause. Native American mascot names should be abolished for all sports teams, schools, universities, and professional sports. Why? Research led by psychology and sociology professors, too numerous to mention, conclude that exposure to Native American team sports increases students' negative stereotyping with other races. In other words, when schools and commissions condone stereotypes, both youth and adults think it's okay to use other stereotypes, which ultimately leads to more bias and discrimination. Is this what we really want to teach our kids?
This is the very absurdity at the heart of the issue. Non-Native children taking Indian identity, while Native children had their identity beaten out of them. This history makes it unconscionable that non-Native students play Indian today. Normally, we would not use the racial slur Redskins. Instead, we would say the R word. Webster's Learner's Dictionary defines it as a degrading, derogatory term for the Native peoples, which should be avoided. For the sake of context in this presentation, we will be using the full word that for us evokes the equivalent of the N-word. At the Neshaminy High School in Bucks County, the student body has been taught for generations that it is acceptable to make a mockery of and to bastardize our culture. The promotion of race-based mascotry in our public schools teaches non-Native students that harmful discrimination is acceptable and provokes disrespectful behavior. This is one way in which systematic racism gets perpetuated by teaching our youth. A Native headdress is earned by a tribal community member over a long period of time, made by other members of the community as a sacred honor. Each time the person did an act of bravery or honor for the tribe, they earned a feather, which was added. After each act of bravery, the recipient had to fast and meditate for days. Wearing the headdress means you are deeply admired and respected among your people. It is a great honor to wear one, an honor that is earned. This is how we have taught our children during early childhood education to trivialize Native culture. As you see here, a student who thinks an honorary tribal custom is merely a costume. School boards create and revise discrimination and harassment policies to protect all minorities. Promotion of race-based Native mascotry keeps Natives as the only minority not protected under school board policies. Native Americans are the only minority where race-based discrimination is tolerated. There would never be another minority used in this degrading way. Nationwide acceptance of Native mascotry trivializes the verbal and physical assaults against those who stand against it. We are told that we must accept this false honor or get over it. This is another example of student behavior as a result of being taught that stereotypes are acceptable. Thousands of schools have changed their race-based mascots across the nation, and have moved forward with the new mascot in a positive way. Maine is leading the way by adopting legislation in the first statewide ban on the use of native mascotry for schools. 2 Pennsylvania districts have just voted to end the use of their Native American mascots, even with the issues of a pandemic affecting their districts, Radnor and Unionville. Would anyone feel honored by this?
The current logo for Neshaminy sports teams, the Skins, which is the shortened version of Redskins, reduces the mascot to the bloody scalps, the graphic genocidal symbol of body parts taken for bounty payment. This happens to be the retired logo of the Cleveland Indians, another example of offensive archaic stereotypes. The hypersexualization of Native women has encouraged the higher rates of violence and murder. The US Department of Justice found that American Indian women face murder rates that are more than 10 times the national average. The CDC states that murder is the leading cause of death among Native American women. 1 in 3 Native women reports having been raped during her lifetime. The first peer-reviewed research specific to the impact of Indian athletic identities on Native and non-Native students was published in 2002. Since then, an ever-growing body of research evidence increasingly reveals the harmful nature of this form of discrimination. Generations of Indigenous activists, scholars, and community members have worked tirelessly to persuade the Washington Redskins professional football team to change their name and imagery. Recently, the incredible momentum around the Black Lives Matter movement, along with threats of defunding by their sponsors, created that final push that we needed to finally convince the team to change. Neshaminy, along with other schools, held Washington up as an excuse for hanging on to their own race-based Native mascotry. But now this is to be the start of a chain reaction among all of the other professional sports, college sports, high school sports, and elementary school sports that still use Indian mascots. Tax dollars should not be used to support educational institutions which promote discrimination, racism, stereotypes, harassment, and bullying. When we know better, we should do better. It is widely recognized in society that blackface is unacceptable. However, there is a disparity for redface. This is the mascot, Chief Illinois, performing a mocking Native dance. The University of Illinois ended this in 2007. Many schools created their Native mascots around 90 to 100 years ago at a time when Native people were highly discriminated against in our country and had no voice. Many tried to hide that they were Native, while schools were proud to misappropriate that identity and culture for their own entertainment. We are not who we are. We are not who we say we are as a country if we make Native people mascots. It does not honor us as Native people for non-Natives to pretend to be us.
For Donna, who, as you know, is a mother and a resident of the Neshaminy School District, it has been an 8-year ongoing battle to get the school board to understand how wrong it is to have race-based stereo mascot in an educational setting. She has experienced horrific social media attacks, cyberbullying, and threats of physical violence from some members of the community. Finally, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission had to take over the case. Donna presented educational materials, studies, and research 16 times to the Neshaminy School Board. In January this year, we formed the Coalition of Natives and Allies, known as CNA, and are continuing to work on this issue of Native American mascots. CNA is a source of information, educational programming, and support. Several schools in Pennsylvania have reached out to us in recent months and are welcoming our education and are changing. Today, the state of Pennsylvania, the Coalition of Natives and Allies, serves to assist school districts in making a transition to a non-race-based mascot and logo. Our website is also a source of information as well as our mailing list, which you can sign up for on the website. If you are interested in this issue, please join the mailing list to stay informed of our progress in any way that you might join us. Donna has individually been working on this issue, as I said, for 8 years, but Indian country has been speaking up about this since the 1960s. There is a TED Talk that we had in the sidebar and as a link that we really would encourage you to watch. It's about 15 minutes long, and it involves Molly and Dana, who is a Penobscot ambassador in Maine. And you can see her here standing in front of the Skowhegan School Board. She started fighting the issue of race-based mascots in high school. The Skowhegan fight went on for nearly a decade. They were the Skowhegan Indians. There were many meetings and testimony and serious backlash until finally in 2019, the school board voted and ended the Indian mascots. And then, as was mentioned earlier, last year, Maine did pass the first law in the entire country that does outlaw Native American mascots. The story of Native American history you just learned is not well known. This is why so many people don't understand how a Native American mascot is hurtful. But by witnessing the death of George Floyd, America has awakened to the injustices that have been present all along. We empower you to all be allies and teachers, sharing what you've learned this evening, which is why that information sheet is so valuable, so that you can actually cite names and laws and dates and what you've learned. The time has come to be in compliance with the values that our country stands for. We need to educate each other to the true history of what really happened to create a 98% depletion of an entire population of Indigenous people. We benefited and we continue to benefit from the fact that Native people were targeted for destruction. Sharing this truth is the work of healing our country. And in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the time is always right to do what is right. So we would like to open this up for reactions and questions and answers. And as was said early in the beginning, that you could put those in the sidebar. You can also indicate there's a hand, raising your hand that you can do in order for you to be kind of called on. And you can either submit your questions in writing, or you can be called on to speak and give a observation. Did I end that correctly? Or are we still? Did that work?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Arla.
Yeah.
So, who is ready to present a question? Do we have any in the chat? Verna or Suzanne? No, nobody submitted questions in the chat.
One just came in from Charmaine. If you want to unmute yourself, Charmaine, she had asked why are school districts so resistant to changing their mascots. Did you want to add more to that, Charmaine?
No, that's all I wanted to ask.
Yeah, why such resistance?
That's a great question, and I'd love to have Donna and Ramona answer that first, and then I have a white person's point of view on that.
Well, mostly from what we've heard is, well, we actually have what we call the bingo card of excuses, but they, say that they mean it as honor and that we should accept it as honor. They don't, the alumni feel that it's their history, it's their, it's their history, and that we don't have the right to take that from them. They feel like we are taking their, their history from them. And financially, they say that, it will cost too much money, but here in the Chamonix School District, they've already spent close to $500,000 fighting to keep the mascot and the name. And if they had, just changed it in the beginning, they wouldn't have spent that much money. And it's not something that they would be required to do, like automatically, like spend, money to do everything, right away. Because a lot of years every year they change their football uniforms so they could do it, in increments. But yeah, it's usually the alumni that we have a lot of problem with, because they, think back on their great years at school and how they were this wonderful, role model of the Chamonix Redskins. And yet when we tell them that it's not an honor, they, basically they don't want to hear from us. I've had plenty of people from my school district tell me to get out of their country and go move back to reservation if I don't like it. And, so they just want us to accept their fake honor.
Okay, my thought on this honestly is I can't give you a good reason why they would be so resistant. I think it's ridiculous that they're so resistant. I was raised always to be kind and mindful of other people. And when somebody tells me that something I have said or done offends them, then I take that to heart. And so I don't understand why they don't listen, they don't hear, and they try to take ownership, and they try to tell us, that no, this isn't offensive. Well, maybe not for them, but it is for us, and so I couldn't give you a good answer for that. Perhaps, I don't know, Arla.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I am definitely thoroughly Euro-American, and I realized that all of us who are not from this land came from somewhere else, and that it's really kind of comes from loss, because we have lost our tribal territory. We have lost our ancestral connection. And for those of us who are really mixed, and we're like about 8 different European strains, we don't even have any hope of going back and finding that root. So there's this sense of loss. And then I read the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger, and he talked about one of the most powerful aspects of the military is that they become a tribe because their lives depend on each other. And one of the ways in which Native community has always existed is that their lives depend on each other. They're very interconnected, very much work in cooperation. The whole notion of consensus is very Native. And so there's this longing to have that feeling. And boy, if we can get the identity and we can connect it to sports, then they hang on for dear life, because here's this amazing identity to be part of this group. And that identity, because there's a lack of an authentic identity in terms of what your ancestral roots are, that one becomes really paramount. And I think there's some interesting facts. Ben Franklin wrote in his book, in his diaries, he talked about how he saw examples of when white settlers were taken into Native community, and then finally the settlers would get there and they'd want to free them from the Native community. For the most part, they never wanted to leave. They didn't want to go back to the settler community. And there's no examples of Native people who left their community so that they could be a settler. So there's a very compelling human heart level connection that I think lots of Euro-Americans miss. And here they get to pretend and to take it. And it's just white privilege alone that enables them to just take it with no consideration. It's like most white people are born on third base and they don't know that they are. And then if they do have an inkling, they feel so guilty about it that they actually just don't want to even think about that. The reason that I also got into this thinking about loss and identity is Skowhegan was the last school to have a Native mascot, but there was a school called Sanford that actually had the Redskins. And when they were in the process of transforming that, I think it was in around 2005, Gisa Tanamuk might know that better, but I knew that a bunch of people that I know who had come down from the reservation, a lot of Native friends of mine that I worked on the commission with, had come down and testified in a church. And the former football coach of the Sanford Redskins was at that meeting. He was retired. And he was furious at the way that the meeting was going, because that's when they were on the verge of letting it go. And he stormed out after yelling, "I was born a Redskin, I'm going to die a Redskin." And that's such powerful language that in identity that that's what led me to realize that this is like a deeper issue. And I think education does help. I think hearing this history that we shared with you today, I think helps put it in context. People have come up afterwards and said, "Oh my God, I had no idea."
And Arla, can I just say, so it's not just about offense either. A lot of people say, why are you offended by it? It's actual, there's actual research, psychological research that proves the harm. And those pictures that you saw of kids at the school, at the football game dressed in Native, headdresses and paint, and, it causes real harm because they take your sacred ways and use them however they want. And we've seen kids go to sporting events, professional sporting events. And there was a group of kids from one school, I think it was the horse school, and they, as a treat, they got to go to a hockey game, I believe it was. And they were down in the seats below, the lower seats, and above them was like a skybox. And some guys up there who thought it would be funny to pour beer on the heads of these little kids. So it's because he thought that they were less than him and that they were just things that he could just do whatever he wants to. And it's like, if somebody comes up and hits you, they don't get the chance to tell you that it doesn't hurt. They are not allowed to tell you that it doesn't hurt. It hurts. And it's not just about, being offended. It actually does hurt your mind and body.
I have a couple of questions and some comments in the chat box. First off, Nancy Miller's offering that I'm sorry, it doesn't even begin to say what I'm feeling. So, questions and things that are coming to mind for some people. I think their emotions are all over the place right now. And we knew that might be part of this. We didn't give a trigger alert with this workshop, but we knew that a lot of feelings were going to come up. And so we're going to encourage you to share those as well. But we do have some questions. And one thing that Susan Worrell offered, which was very similar to what Arla had said, which is that alumni feel it's their right to do what they want. It's white privilege mentality at work. And so the question from Janet Mills was, did the School for Native American Children in Carlisle have any discipline action, or were they guided by any legal entity?
U.S. government. It was a tactic to do away with the Indian problem. So they were doing their job.
Well, those kids were abused. They were, they were locked up. They suffered physical abuse and sexual abuse. That was prevalent in all the schools. The oversight, there was no oversight.
They were run on a military model, and many of them that were run by religious groups, the Catholic Church being one, they actually didn't have enough money. And so the kids often didn't have enough to eat. And they also becoming ill. And some of them trying to run home and freezing to death in the northern, and like in Canada, trying to run back home and not making it because of exposure. And any number of stories. The stories have come out not only in Canada in the Truth Commission, where they did do events where people recorded their stories, but also the all the testimony of Native people and non-Native people who were involved in the child welfare system in Maine, those are archived at Bowdoin College, and anyone can go in. And if the person said that it was okay for the public to hear them, that you can go in and hear those testimonies. Because when you see the actual stories of what happened to people, it's pretty unbelievable.
That's very helpful. And also remember that in Eastern PA, we have connections with Circle Legacy, and with the Carlisle School, you can have tours, and not a tour that's the military tour, but a tour that actually stresses the school, the Indian school there, and you can learn about this. And so, you know, keep in touch with us. We offer those tours, and also they're offered through Circle Legacy. And you can get to know more because this is right in our backyard, right here. The question from Charmaine is regarding Native Americans and a federally protected class. Charmaine, did you want to say more about that question? Because I'm not really sure where you're getting at with it. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think there was a typo. I was asking, are Native Americans a federally protected class?
I don't.
In what way?
Yeah.
Well, for example, minorities. So, you know, LGBT is a protected class, you know, are protected classes. Black is protected class. So there are anti-discrimination laws that apply to protected classes. Would they also apply to Native Americans?
Well, that's
Donna, why don't you
something
take
that
that
we
one?
are actually trying to work on. Hello? That's something that we're actually trying to work on with legislation, because of this issue with the native mascots. You would think that, like the Chamonix has, you know, a policy that says, you know, limit, that they do not accept any form of discrimination. And it says including but not limited to, but yet they will still celebrate these mascots. So how can, so we should be included in the minorities, but apparently we aren't, because we have to keep fighting this issue, and we are the minority of minorities. And they would not, I mean, I've had this conversation with the Chamonix School District administrators that they would not allow any other form of discrimination or any other racial slurs. And I've asked them, then why do they allow this slur and this discrimination? And they say, because in the Chamonix, they don't consider it a racial slur, and they don't consider it discrimination. It's an honor in the Chamonix. So it's something that has forced us now to actually go towards working on legislation to actually talk about banning mascots, banning these race-based native mascots.
And we had a question from Gladys. You raised her hand.
Gladys, you're muted.
If I know, just unmuted. Thank you so much. I've
Oops.
hear me?
Now,
Off and on.
I've been to the Carlisle School. I had the tour with Conan, and every time I hear the information, I get a visceral reaction. And my question is, do you do any collaborative work with any of other marginalized groups?
Such as?
The NAACP, Latinos?
yeah, I have actually reached out to NAACP, and I mean, NAACP has made a statement on mascots, you know, that, you know, how that they're against, you know, native mascotry. And we are, you know, whenever there's an issue in my community with any kind of racism, I always show up, and usually that, you know, NAACP members are there, and I speak with them and we have support. But I really think that we do need to collaborate more and recognize that Native Americans are people of color, and that we should be all working together. We, you know, we have a smaller voice, and we really need NAACP and large organizations like that to support us and bring us to the forefront, and bring our issues to the front because the NAACP has such a large voice. Black Lives Matter, we all support each other, but we really need that larger voice to help us.
Right, because it would expand your voice in the public square if you
Yes,
do more collaboration.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is it Liselli? Liselli?
This question about the Seminoles in Florida.
Yes.
This came up earlier, that the Seminole, the part of the Seminole tribe in Florida is working with one of the state universities. And they are invited, the women create regalia for the actor who plays Osceola, and the tribe has worked with them making history classes about Seminole history. But one of our CONAM members who is Native said that he doesn't think that that portion of the Seminole Nation is doing any favors for any Indians, that they are, he feels that they are doing this because it's financially advantageous to them. But I mean, we saw a clip of a video of at one of their football games. They're supposed to be honoring Osceola. Well, two newscasters got dressed up and pantomimed one of them killing Osceola. I mean, it leads to all kinds of disrespectful behavior. So does anybody else have any input on that?
Yeah, they should not have to sell themselves as a sideshow in order to get true education in their schools. No other race would be asked to do that to get their history, the true history taught. And
Whoops.
sure that there's a lot of minority history that is pushed up about true minority history, but I don't think that there would be any other minority that would be asked to be a sideshow in order to get their history added to a college, curriculum. And Bill Murray, when he dressed up as Osceola and had a newscaster, throw him down on the mat, that is not honoring Osceola. That is just making a mockery and a sideshow of that. And the part of the tribe that is in Oklahoma does not appreciate the ones who are in Florida, the Seminole who are in Florida, allowing that kind of behavior.
I want to also mention that kind of imagery of a Native American being attacked, being Trail of Tears, scalp them, that kind of thing that people tend to get all riled up about when they're competing in a football team or basketball or whatever. That kind of imagery, as a mother of young men, I mean, that's the kind of thing, you don't want your children to see that. You don't want to see, you don't want your kids to see, people killing and harming your people for entertainment.
There was a follow-up question. Thank you for those responses. Was the school in Carlisle, PA privately owned? I think I can probably just answer that for us. No, it wasn't privately owned. It was it was the first federal school, is my understanding, boarding school. So it was federally run, and that's why it was based off of the military model. Pratt was actually a former military man, and so he based it off his experiences of incarcerating in a military prison in Florida, adult Native peoples, and then brought that to the children. So if you can imagine, I believe that is true. If that sounds right.
That's actually my understanding as well, is that the US government it was too costly to be continuing to fight Native people. And so they called that the Indian problem. That, you know, if there was any resistance at all to all the taking that the government wanted to do, and they thought, and then this guy, Pratt, came up with a solution. I know what we'll do. We'll take their children and we'll turn them into little white people, which obviously all it did was create a genocide.
And if you notice what Arla said there, the Indian problem, many of us are familiar with the term, the Jewish problem. The Nazis learned it from us. So early on when Arla was explaining, this is our history, this is our history. This is what we've done. We've spread this far and wide across the planet.
Right, and that is true, because in the Nuremberg trials, and I've read this, that Hitler admired the United States for what he did to his, you know, natives here, to, you know, to solve his Indian problem, you know, to solve our, or the United States Indian problem, you know, putting natives on reservations and just, you know, so many awful things with poisoning and taking children, and Hitler admired that. And actually, when he was a child, he liked to play cowboys and Indians, and he thought of Jews and Slavs as Redskins, and that he learned it from this country. So.
And that's a good point you're making too, Donna, because, you know, this idea of red skin, black skin, and it's all a construct. And so he was able to identify Jewish peoples then as like the Redskins. So these are not real biological terms that we're using when we're doing this, right? I want to look again. Let's see, a number of people have made comments. I'm not sure, Nancy, what you were trying to say, except that I did understand the last part where you said it's my white privilege being exposed. And that is necessary, that is needed. Did you want to make any more comments on that? Is Nancy still with us?
You had said you were sorry that you didn't put a disclaimer there, and I didn't mean any disrespect at all. And I'm sorry that that came across that way. And it's been talked about that our white privilege, you know, is being exposed, and that's necessary.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate very much what you're doing.
This is good. This is good. Good work for us that are non-natives to be doing.
Yes.
Barbara Revere wrote that while in Nebraska, she was a child social worker, and the Indian Child Welfare Act came about due to Native families taking their children back while in non-reservation white foster homes. That is still a huge issue, children being taken away. The legacy of that boarding school. I didn't know if anyone wanted to make any more comments on that.
Well, there was somebody asked a question about not necessarily mascots, but things like the tomahawk chop, which from what I know is equally offensive.
Yeah, Carlin was asking about if she could hear more about the latter when it comes to like the dances that are done in the tomahawk chop, I guess. Did you want to expand upon that, Carlin? Is Carlin still with us?
Yeah, I just needed to unmute myself. It's very offensive. Like, obviously all of it is offensive, but I just didn't know if there was any additional conversation that anybody that has talked about mascots to different school districts or different, you know, or in terms of the Redskins or the Atlanta Braves or the Chiefs, or there's so many professional teams that that abuse Native practices in really offensive ways.
Well, they all provoke behaviors that are offensive and harmful. I mean, the tomahawk chop is a murderous act, you know, and why would you want, I mean, I've seen it, you know, that they do it in schools, and why would you want to promote something so harmful, you know, in a school? But all of it, I mean, when you provoke people to dress up and act as, you know, in another person's culture or, you know, traditions, that's harmful, because then you're making it into like just a play. It's just something fun to do. And you're not teaching the truth of what it is all about. You know, I ask people, how would you feel if your religious ceremonies were displayed on at a football game? You'd probably get pretty offended by that, so.
Mm.
I got a question. What is this that just came up? Suzanne, I think you put this up there about transracial. What does that mean?
Someone had listed this movie, and I just looked at it. It's a documentary. Now I have to put it back in again.
Did you see that?
Oh, it's Blood Memory.
Yes, so a documentary about.
Yeah, actually, that's I met the director of that, and also saw it in Ambler when he was first trying it out, and it's really very much about Sandra Whitehawk, who, along with Gisa Tanamuk, who was on the call, was one of our Indigenous commissioners for the Truth Commission in Maine. And she was taken at a very early age and worked her way back to finding her. She's Sekunja Lakota, and she found her family, and she's created an organization helping so many of those Native children who were taken and put into adoption and lost connection with their tribe and their families, and bringing them back. And this film is very moving because it shows a ceremony that she's organized and does, where these people who are now, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, are coming back and being welcomed back into, I have goosebumps just talking about being welcomed back into their original communities, and creating healing and being able to talk in talking circles. And yeah, it's a really good film.
And if you go to the website, they also have some other mini documentary presentations on removal and things like that. So again, just more information for us. Jack is asking, should Native Americans be referred to as Native Americans or American Indians, or by their tribe's name?
I guess it depends if you're talking about a person or a group. There's, I think, when I was growing up, it was American Indian. But as I've gotten older and, through talking to other people and how they felt, and feeling that, or understanding that people feel the same way that I do, that I'd rather just, as a group, be called Native, because we were Native before America existed. So, I don't consider myself Native American because my people were here first. But I think if you're talking about an individual, you would talk about them from their tribal affiliation. Or
a lot of Native Americans are from a couple tribes. So I've seen interviews with, and Native Americans don't. Some Native Americans want to be called Native Americans. Others prefer American Indians. So of course,
Ramona, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that you can ask 5 different Native Americans and get 5 different answers.
Yeah.
I don't care if you call me Native. I don't care if you call me a Native American. I don't care if you call me an American Indian. I don't care if you call me Indigenous or First Peoples. There's so many different people and different preferences on, what they prefer to be called. I don't mind any of it. Just don't call me a redskin.
Right.
Amen. And I think that's a really important piece too, is that asking what people, how they identify themselves, right? Out of respect and seeing each other as human beings, and just asking. Yeah, go ahead.
What Ramona just said, don't call me a redskin. There are, so many people that have said, if you think it's an honor, walk up to a Native person and call them that and see what happens. See how honored they are. Go onto a reservation and call them, see what
Try
you get.
using that word around in the res, that gets you your answer real quick.
Yeah. Well, we have a short video.
Well, actually, I just wanted to say something, Sherry, before the video. speaking as a white person, and there are a lot of white people on this call, I just wanted to say something about the word ally, because what we found in Maine is that the white privilege is just so deep in our bones that it came up, and all of the allies that we trained in ally trainings started to think of ally as a noun rather than a verb. And they started to take on that identity. And it's really easy for white people to get confused that if they post the right links and if they carry the right signs, but the real allyship is to look at how you are part of continuing colonization and looking at ways that you can help use or leverage your privilege in dismantling it. And one of the questions that you could ask is in your local school district. You could ask, how do you deal with Native education? And that 6th step that we have as one of our attachments that the coalition created is a really good way for an alternative of how schools can truly honor Native people. And even just sharing what you've learned here tonight with people in your family or friends, really, really important that people get informed. So that's a really good way to be an ally. And it needs to be under Indigenous direction and leadership always.
That was good, Arlie. You were anticipating what I was going to ask at the very end, which was how do we become true allies, not just in name, but in action. But I think you did want us to have Sherry show this very short 2-minute film, and then we'll come back and we can have more conversation. We want to respect your time. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. Everyone can see it?
Yep. We just need the sound.
Everyone can hear it?
Proud.
Yep.
Forgotten. Indian. Navajo. Blackfoot. Inuit and Sioux. Survivor. Spiritualist. Patriot. Sitting Bull. Hiawatha. And Jim Thorpe. Mother. Father. Son. Daughter. Chief. Apache. Pueblo. Choctaw. Chippewa. And Crow. Underserved. Struggling. Resilient. Squanto. Red Cloud. Tecumseh. And Crazy Horse. Rancher. Teacher. Doctor. Soldier. Seminole. Seneca. Mohawk. And Creek. Mills. Will Rogers. Geronimo. Unyielding. Strong. Indomitable. Native Americans call themselves many things. The one thing they don't.
And there you have it. And there you have it. A very powerful way.
Mm-hmm. If anyone wants to share that with anyone they know, all you have to do is go to YouTube and put in proud to be, and then you'll see it.
And I can send that out. The Eastern Pennsylvania, we passed legislation. It was almost unanimous. Few people like to hold on to that R word from Washington, but most of you voted it through a couple years ago to be in talks with our local schools and school districts, et cetera, about this issue and to be talking about this issue any way that we can. And so this has been very, very helpful. I think for many of us to be able to live into that legislation that we passed as a church for Eastern Pennsylvania. But I also want to remind you that you can go and you can become involved, as you heard, with the Coalition of Natives and Allies who we've been hearing from today. I'm going to put that link in the box. I will also send that out to you all.
I just shared a link for a YouTube video. It's called Spirits Don't Speak English, and it's from a survivor of Indian boarding school. His name is Windy Boy.
So that's also in there.
Oh,
Excellent.
also, you can look for us on Facebook.
Excellent, excellent. And as many of you know, this is Native American Heritage Month. I'm going to send you something from the NCAI about that and information about that. But in light of that, part of the reason why we had this at this time of year is because we want to recognize that holiday, but also this whole month, but also to understand that even though we have Native American Ministries Sundays, usually after Easter, that you can celebrate Native American Ministries anytime in your churches. And you can take the collection at any time. And I would say, in light of the pandemic, in light of other things that have been happening, it's more important than ever that we support our Native American churches. And so if you have a Native American church that you're working with or affiliated with, if you have a Native American ministry that you're affiliated with, it doesn't have to be a part of the church. If you are working with Native peoples or First Peoples, original peoples of this land, and you want to support their ministry, we encourage you to do that. I'm going to put also in there a link for giving for United Methodist Native American Sunday. But again, now you've got two in a row, but hopefully you'll be able to tell the difference between the two links, and I will send them out again. But you can do anything. You can have programs, you can have special prayers, and you can have Native American Ministry Sunday anytime during the year, and you can have it even more than once. So I feel like I'm talking more than I planned on it. So I'll let Sherry, who organized this, to talk a little bit. I personally am so very, very thankful for this presentation and so very honored for the many ways in which Ramona and Donna and Arla have honored us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and if anybody has a school district that they're in where they have this mascot issue that they're dealing with or would like to deal with, we would like to help. That's what we're here for.
Other thoughts, feelings, questions?
Oh, Sherry doesn't realize that she's muted.
I'm a technical dunce today. So you have the Coalition of Native Allies in the chat box. You have the, Suzanne, did you put their website in there? Okay, good. So I encourage all of you to get on their mailing list if you're not already. And also you can get on CONAM's mailing list. You can contact me or Verna. What's the official email for our CONAM? You're muted, Vern.
epaconam@gmail.com.
Okay. And also, you can go on to the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference website, epaumc.org, to get to us. So it's 5:39, a little bit over, but I hope we've addressed any issues, any questions that people have. Again, you can contact us with any further follow-up that you need. And God bless you all. And thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you very much to all our presenters.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Amen.
All right, Bob.
Bye, Gisatanamuk.
So nice to share time and space with you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Conan. Thank you, Ramona
Thank
and
you,
Donna.
everybody.
And Arla.
Thank you.
Night.
Night. There, we're off. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Gladys.